Welcome to Silent Queen's Judgment. I'm glad you're here. Now, let's get into the story. Nolan Whitaker stood in the warm amber glow of Hazel's kitchen. The kitchen she had spent 3 weeks tiling herself, with his 26-year-old girlfriend draped across his back like a trophy he had just won. Both of them laughing at the woman they had just shoved out the back door into a February blizzard in northern Ontario. Hazel Whitaker stood on the deck in her wool socks. The snow was already coming over the tops of them. The wind off Georgian Bay had teeth. It bit straight through her flannel shirt and the thin cardigan she'd grabbed off the hook on her way out, because Nolan had not given her time to grab anything else. He had given her exactly 4 seconds before his hand found her shoulder and the cold air found her face. They thought they were looking at a woman who had nowhere to go. They were wrong about almost everything. Chapter 1. What the storm revealed. The argument had not started with shouting. It had started the way the worst ones always do. Quietly, in a kitchen, over a piece of paper. Hazel had been sitting at the farmhouse table, going through the household accounts. It was a Thursday evening in mid-February, the kind of night where the wind off the bay rattled the old storm windows in their frames, and the woodstove had to work hard to keep the downstairs warm. Nolan was supposed to be working late. He had been working late a lot lately. 4, sometimes 5 nights a week, at the branch office of Montrose Capital Group in Barrie, where he was a senior portfolio manager. He had come home early, which should have been good news. It wasn't. Hazel had been looking for a receipt. The roofers had sent a final invoice for the barn restoration, $42,000, and she needed to reconcile it against the joint renovation fund they kept at Meridian Trust. When she pulled up the account on her laptop, the balance was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Significantly wrong. $87,000 had been transferred out in 2 installments over the past 6 weeks, routed to a numbered company she had never heard of. 10493882 Ontario Limited. She was still staring at the screen when she heard his boots on the mudroom floor. Nolan was 39. He was the kind of man who had always moved through the world with a particular kind of ease. Broad-shouldered, well-spoken, the sort of person who got upgraded at hotel check-ins and whose name people remembered. When Hazel met him 8 years ago at a heritage conservation gala in Toronto, she had been charmed by his directness. He had walked up to her across a crowded room and said, simply, "You're the most interesting person here and I haven't spoken to you yet." She had laughed. She had believed him. She had married him 2 years later, in October, at the property she had inherited from her grandmother outside Collingwood. The same property where he had just shoved her into a blizzard. "You're home early," she said when he came through from the mudroom. He stopped in the doorway. He looked at the laptop. Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly. More like the calculation of a man deciding how much he needed to explain. "Working from home tomorrow," he said. "What are you doing?" "Looking at the Meridian account." She turned the laptop toward him. "Where did $87,000 go, Nolan?" He didn't answer right away. He went to the counter. He poured himself 2 fingers of the single malt she'd brought back from a trip to Edinburgh 3 years ago. A bottle she'd been saving. He took a long sip before he turned around. "That's a business investment," he said. "I'm restructuring some personal holdings. It's not your concern." "It's a joint account," Hazel said. "It's entirely my concern." "Don't do that," he said, his voice dropping into the register she had learned to dread over 8 years. The quiet, contemptuous one. The one that made her feel like she was being unreasonable for asking a reasonable question. "Don't go through my finances and then try to make me explain myself like I'm one of your employees." "I'm not your employee either," she said. "I'm your wife. That money was set aside for the barn. The roofers need to be paid next week." The sound of a second set of footsteps on the stairs stopped them both. Hazel had known, in the abstract, theoretical way one forces oneself to know a thing, before one is ready to fully know it, that something had been wrong for months. Nolan's phone, always face down on the nightstand. The work trips that ran a day longer than they used to. The particular way he had stopped looking at her when she walked into a room, as though she had become furniture. She had carried this knowledge quietly, the way women sometimes do, hoping she was wrong, hoping the ground was more solid than it felt. It was not more solid than it felt. The woman who came down the stairs was young, mid-20s, Hazel thought, wearing one of Nolan's university sweatshirts and a pair of leggings, carrying a glass of wine with the relaxed ease of someone entirely at home. Her name, Hazel would learn later, was Priya Anand. She worked in Nolan's office. She had been in their house, in Hazel's house, before, apparently, because she moved through it without hesitation. Priya stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at Hazel with the particular expression of a person who has decided in advance that they are the protagonist of a story in which you are the inconvenience. You should tell her, Priya said to Nolan, setting her wine glass on the kitchen island. On the maple butcher block, Hazel had sourced herself from a mill in Muskoka, with a small, deliberate click. You've been putting it off long enough. Nolan set down his glass. I was going to do this differently. Do what differently? Hazel said. I want a divorce, Nolan said. I should have said it 6 months ago. The marriage has been over for a long time, Hazel, and you know it. We're just not right for each other anymore. I've been trying to find the right moment. The right moment, Hazel repeated. I've already spoken to a lawyer. The numbered company holds an investment property I purchased in Collingwood, a condo development. I moved our liquid assets there because I didn't want them tied up in proceedings. He said it the way he said everything he had decided in advance, with a kind of boardroom finality, as though the conversation were a formality he was graciously extending to her. You can have the Toronto apartment. I'll take the farm. The farm. Her grandmother's farm. The 40 acres on the escarpment that Hazel had spent 3 years, and a significant portion of her own money restoring, the barn, the heritage orchard, the log summer kitchen she had catalogued and rebuilt beam by beam. Her grandmother, Marvell Okafor Whitmore, had left it to Hazel specifically by name in a will drafted in 1998, with a handwritten note attached that said, You always knew what things were worth keeping. You'll take the farm, Hazel said. My name is on the deed, Nolan said. I co-signed the mortgage transfer when we... You co-signed a document that was prepared incorrectly, Hazel said. And we both know it. Nolan's jaw tightened. Priya looked between them. The fireplace crackled. The wind outside ran itself along the eaves of the house. I think, Priya said, tilting her head slightly, that you might need some time outside to process this. It's a lot to take in. She said it with a kind of studied gentleness that was worse than cruelty. And then Nolan took 3 steps across the kitchen and opened the back door. The cold air came in like a wall. He looked at Hazel. He didn't touch her. He was too careful for that, too practiced at leaving no marks. But he put his body between her and the rest of the house, and he gestured with his chin toward the deck. Go cool off, he said. Come back when you're ready to have an adult conversation. Hazel looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Priya, who was watching with an expression of serene, faintly amused satisfaction. She stepped outside. The door closed behind her. The deadbolt turned. The snow was coming horizontally off the bay. It was 11 degrees below zero, with the wind chill. Hazel stood on the deck she had built with a contractor from Thornbury 3 summers ago, in her wool socks and her flannel shirt, and she breathed in the cold air until her lungs ached with it. Through the kitchen window, she could see them. Priya had moved to stand beside Nolan. She was laughing at something he said. He poured her a glass of the Edinburgh Scotch. Hazel did not cry. The cold was clarifying. It had a way, she thought, of burning off everything that wasn't essential, leaving only the things that were true. And the things that were true were these. The farm was hers. The money they had taken was hers. The house they were drinking her whiskey in was hers in every way that actually mattered. Nolan had made a fundamental error, the same error that arrogant men had been making for centuries. He had looked at a quiet woman and seen someone without power. She turned away from the window and stepped off the deck into the snow. Chapter 2. What no one knew. To understand what Hazel did next, it helps to understand what Hazel was. What she appeared to be, to Nolan, to his colleagues, to the dinner party circuit in Collingwood and Barrie, where they had spent the last several years, was a heritage property consultant. She had a small firm, Okafor Whitmore Preservation, that she ran out of a restored Victorian in Collingwood's downtown core, with 2 employees and a modest public profile. She assessed old buildings. She advised landowners on restoration. She occasionally consulted for the Ontario Heritage Trust. She drove a 10-year-old Land Rover with mud on the wheel wells and a back seat full of architectural survey binders. She was by all appearances comfortable but not exceptional. A professional woman in her early 40s with good taste and a quiet manner, and no obvious ambitions beyond the work she clearly loved. This was accurate, as far as it went. What it did not account for was Marvell. Hazel's grandmother, Marvelle Adaze Okafor Whitmore, had come to Canada from Enugu, Nigeria, in 1967, at 22 years old, with a degree in civil engineering and a letter of introduction to a construction firm in Toronto that she had obtained through a professor at the University of Nigeria who had once worked with the firm's founder. The construction firm had offered her a junior drafting position and quietly assumed she would leave within 2 years, get married, and disappear. Instead, Marvell had stayed for 43 years. She had patented 2 load-bearing innovations in commercial foundation design. She had quietly, without fanfare, acquired an ownership stake in the firm when it restructured in 1981, increasing that stake every decade with the methodical patience of someone who understood that compound interest applied to everything, not just money. By the time she retired in 2010, Marvella Okafor Whitmore was the majority shareholder of what had become, through a series of quiet mergers and acquisitions, one of the largest private infrastructure development companies in Ontario. She had never appeared on a list. She had never given a profile interview. She had never wanted to. She had left Hazel the farm, the company, operating under the holding name Drumlin Group, and a letter that said, in part, "The foundation of power is patience. Build slowly. Let them assume." Hazel had been 28 when Marvell died. She had spent the subsequent 12 years doing exactly that. She had kept the firm's public profile minimal, run it through a series of subsidiary trusts, and built her consulting practice as both a genuine vocation and a convenient cover for the work she was actually doing, which was, largely, what Marvell had always done, quietly acquiring things. Drumlin Group had, in the 18 months before that February night, acquired a controlling interest in a Barrie-based financial services holding company called Meridian Capital Partners. Meridian Capital Partners was the parent entity of Montrose Capital Group. The firm where Nolan Whitaker was a senior portfolio manager worked, technically, for Hazel. She had not engineered this. It had happened through the ordinary mechanics of careful investment, and when it did, Hazel's legal team, specifically, a woman named Constance Ellery Park, who had been the family's principal legal strategist since Marvell's time, and who had a reputation in Toronto financial circles for being extraordinarily difficult to outmaneuver, had flagged it in a routine quarterly briefing. Hazel had noted it. She had filed it away. Now, standing in the snow beside her old Land Rover, her socks soaked through and her fingers going numb, she unlocked the car with shaking hands and got into the driver's seat. She did not start the engine right away. She sat in the cold interior, watching her breath fog in front of her. The snow was building up on the windshield. Through it at a distance, the kitchen windows glowed warm and gold. She thought about 8 years, about the dinners she had made, the events she had attended, the conversations she had quietly redirected, the patience she had extended past the point where patience made sense, because she had wanted to believe that what she had chosen was worth preserving. She thought about Priya Anand in her grandmother's kitchen, setting a wine glass on Marvella's butcher block with that small, deliberate click. Then she reached into the glove compartment and took out her phone. It was not her regular phone. It was a secondary device, a secure, encrypted model that Constance had insisted on years ago for communications involving Drumlin business. It ran on a dedicated satellite network that bypassed the local towers entirely. She found the contact and pressed call. Constance answered on the second ring. She was not a person who expressed surprise out loud. "Hazel," she said. "It's late." "I know," Hazel said. "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize." "Tell me," Hazel told her. She kept it brief and factual, the way Marvell had taught her to communicate in a crisis. Subject, context, what you need. Outside, the snow kept falling. The farmhouse windows kept glowing. When she finished, there was a pause. "The numbered company," Constance said. 1049382 Ontario. "I'll have our forensic accounting team on it within the hour. If he moved joint marital assets into a personal holding vehicle prior to initiating divorce proceedings, that's not a gray area. That's fraudulent dissipation. We'll freeze the account before morning." A pause. "You said he told you he wants the farm. He said his name is on the deed. His name is on a co-signature for a mortgage transfer. The original deed of title, passed from your grandmother's estate to you as sole beneficiary, was never altered. I drafted that instrument myself. Nolan Whitaker has no claim on that property that would survive a 20-minute hearing." Another pause, shorter. "Hazel, did he put his hands on you?" "He put his body in the doorway and blocked my exit. He opened the door. He gestured for me to leave." That's constructive forced removal in a domestic context. We can work with that. Constance's voice was dry, precise, and utterly without drama. "I'll have an emergency application prepared for the morning. In the meantime, I want you away from the property." "I'm in my car." "Good. Go to the Collingwood office. There's a key in the lockbox under the back step, and I believe Sybil left a sleeping bag in the storage room from the site survey last month. I'll have a full briefing ready for you by 7 a.m. Constance. He also has a woman in the house. Priya nodded. She's an employee of Montrose Capital. A very brief silence. Is she aware of the asset transfers? She encouraged him to tell me about them. Then, she's a participant, not a bystander. The sound of typing began in the background, unhurried, methodical. I'll look at her employment history with Montrose. If she had any operational involvement in the numbered company, we can name her in the dissipation claim. A pause. One more thing. Yes. I know you, Hazel. I know what Marvella taught you. And I know you understand that this needs to be done properly, through the right channels, in the right order. But I also know what it's like to sit in a cold car after something like this. Constance's voice changed, just slightly. You're going to be all right. The foundation holds. Hazel exhaled. I know, she said. Thank you. She put the phone in her coat pocket, started the engine, and turned on the seat heater. Then she sat for a moment, looking at the house, before she shifted into drive. She did not leave immediately. She pulled a few meters up the lane, turned off the headlights, and sat in the dark where the birch trees gave her cover from the kitchen windows. She had a clear view of the house, she thought. Let them get comfortable. Chapter 3. By morning. At 2:47 in the morning, the power went out at the farmhouse on Concession 7. Nolan was in the master bedroom. He'd been drifting in and out of uneasy sleep, his mind running through the conversation in the kitchen, not with guilt, but with the procedural anxiety of a man who had expected a cleaner execution. Charlotte had not cried. He'd expected her to cry. He had expected, if he was honest, a version of the evening that ended with him being magnanimous, with her thanking him, eventually, for his honesty, with himself feeling like a reasonable man who had handled a difficult situation with maturity. She hadn't given him that. She had looked at him with something he couldn't name, and walked outside, and then, as far as he could tell, driven away. Her 10-year-old Land Rover was gone from the lane when he looked out the window before bed, which meant she had somewhere to go, which bothered him more than he expected it to. When the lights went out, he lay still for a moment, listening. The furnace had been running. Now the house was silent in a different way. The soft mechanical hum he never noticed until it was gone. He got up. He went to the breaker panel in the mudroom. Nothing was tripped. He checked his phone. No signal. Not unusual out here in a storm, but inconvenient. He checked the propane backup generator outside the utility room. The panel was dark. He pressed the override twice. Nothing. He stood in the cold and the blowing snow and stared at a machine that had been serviced in October and should have activated automatically within 30 seconds of a power interruption. What's happening? Priya called from inside, her voice carrying the sharp edge of someone who had not planned to spend the night somewhere without Wi-Fi. Generator's not responding, he said. Can you fix it? He couldn't fix it. He went back inside. The house was already cooling. He got blankets from the linen closet. He tried on various devices to get a signal. Nothing worked. The router was dead. The cellular connection was dead. And the backup battery on the landline base station had at some point, unbeknownst to him, died and never been replaced. He sat in the kitchen in the dark and the cold, and he thought about the conversation he had tried to have, about the numbered company, about the deed, about the way Hazel had said, "You co-signed a document that was prepared incorrectly, and we both know it." He had assumed she was bluffing. She had always been. Careful wasn't quite the right word, but precise. She chose her words the way she chose everything else, for accuracy. He had filed this thought away and not returned to it. He was returning to it now. At 4:15, a notification came through on his corporate device, which ran on a dedicated satellite channel, and had in the past half hour regained a partial signal. He almost didn't look at it. He did. It was from Meridian Capital Partners, the parent holding company of Montrose. The subject line was formal and unambiguous. He read it once. He set the phone down. He picked it up and read it again. His employment with Montrose Capital Group had been terminated, effective immediately, for cause. An internal audit, initiated by the Meridian Board, following a regulatory notification regarding unauthorized movement of personal and client-adjacent funds, had identified multiple irregularities in his management of the portfolio accounts assigned to his division. Legal had been notified. The relevant regulatory bodies had been notified. His access to all Montrose systems, the Barry offices, and all associated accounts had been permanently revoked. His hands were cold. The blanket over his shoulders was not doing much. Priya was somewhere behind him, wrapped in the duvet from the guest room. He opened his personal banking app. It loaded to a page he had never seen before. A temporary hold notice, in plain language, advising him that his accounts had been flagged for review under Ontario's Family Law Act, provisions governing marital asset dissipation, and that access was suspended pending legal proceedings. He went to the numbered company portal. The portal loaded. The balance was 0. Where the balance should have been, there was a single line of text injected into the interface where an automated message would normally appear, in plain and personal English. You told me the farm would be yours. He stared at those words for a long time. Priya came up behind him. She looked at the screen over his shoulder. Her voice changed. Nolan, what is happening? It's a system issue, he said. It's temporary. My phone, she said. I got a notification. My phone has a partial signal suddenly. I got an email. He knew before she said it. She had been terminated from Montrose Capital Group. She had been named as a material participant in the dissipation of marital assets in the civil claim filed under the name of Hazel Adaisy Whittaker. Her own accounts, flagged as receiving funds traceable to the numbered company, were frozen pending the investigation. What did I receive? Priya said, her voice climbing. I never received anything from that company. You told me the Collingwood condo was an investment you were making together. You said it was both of your money. You said she knew. I was handling the finances, Nolan said. You don't understand how it was structured. I understand that my name is in a civil claim, Priya said. I understand that I have been fired. I understand that I cannot access my bank account. She was not crying. She was furious in the particular way of someone who has realized, all at once, that they have been used. Who is Hazel Whittaker? You told me her name was Hazel Evans. He did not answer. You told me she was a heritage consultant, Priya said. You told me she had no money of her own. You told me this farm was yours. And you were being generous letting her live here. That's Nolan. Who is she? The generator outside made a sound. Not starting. Just settling further into silence, as though whatever had been keeping it dead had finalized itself. The house was 41 degrees now. The snow was pressed against the kitchen window in the particular layered way that meant it had been falling for hours and intended to continue. And then, outside, the crunch of tires on snow. Nolan went to the front window and looked out. 2 black SUVs, not police, no lights, had pulled to a stop in the lane. The doors opened in unison. 4 people stepped out into the snow. They wore dark parkas with the collars up, and they moved across the yard with the particular unhurried precision of people who had done this before and found it unremarkable. Chapter 4. The Reckoning. The knock on the farmhouse door was 3 deliberate strikes, evenly spaced. Not aggressive. Just final. Then calm carrying, clearly amplified by something in the woman's posture rather than a megaphone, the kind of voice that expected to be obeyed. Mr. Nolan Whittaker. This property is the subject of an emergency injunction issued by the Ontario Superior Court of Justice at 2:12 this morning. You are requested to open the door and receive service. If you do not respond within 2 minutes, we will proceed under the access provisions of the court order. Nolan looked at the door. He looked at Priya, who had come to stand in the hallway. She was hugging the duvet around herself, her dark eyes wide. Call the police, she said. My phone won't. He grabbed his corporate device. It had partial signal. He dialed 911. The dispatcher who answered him was polite and efficient. She was also, she informed him, already aware of the situation at Concession 7, Lot 14, in the township of Clearwater. An emergency court order had been filed and served on the relevant municipal authorities. Local police had been notified and had confirmed they would not be intervening in a civil property injunction actively managed by the court. If he felt he was in physical danger, he was welcome to leave the property immediately. He lowered the phone. The knock came again. 3 strikes. Even. Nolan crossed the entryway. The entryway with the hand-pegged oak floors that Hazel had spent 6 months sourcing and installing. The walls she had stripped and replastered herself one winter when the contractor fell through. And he opened the door. The woman on the porch was about 50, with close-cropped gray hair, and an expression that had probably never contained anything as inefficient as impatience. She wore a charcoal wool coat over her tactical parka. She was holding a thick, waterproof document folder. Mr. Whittaker, she said. My name is Barry Ellsworth. I'm a licensed process server and civil enforcement officer retained by Ellery Park Legal Group on behalf of your spouse, Hazel Adaisy Whittaker. She extended the folder. You're being formally served. He didn't take it. She set it on the entryway bench. Hazel's entryway bench, the one she had built from the oak of a fallen tree on the escarpment. The documents contain, Barry Ellsworth said, without consulting notes. An emergency injunction under the Family Law Act prohibiting the removal or further transfer of any marital assets pending division proceedings. An application for exclusive possession of the matrimonial home, granted provisionally by the court pending a full hearing. A notice of claim for fraudulent dissipation of marital assets in the amount of $87,000, naming you and Priya Anand as co-respondents, and a formal trespass notice, effective as of 12:01 this morning, requiring you to vacate the property at 2241 Concession 7 within 2 hours of service. She looked at her watch. It is currently 4:49 a.m. You have until 6:49 to gather personal belongings, clothing and personal effects only, as itemized in the annexed list, and leave the premises. Nolan's mouth was open. He closed it. This is my home, he said. My name is on the deed. Your name appears as a co-signatory on a mortgage assumption document from 2019, Barry Ellsworth said, with the patience of someone who has corrected this particular misunderstanding before. The property deed itself names Hazel Adaisy Whitaker as sole title holder, registered in 2011, transferred from the estate of Marvelli Adaisy Okafor Whitmore. The co-signature document does not confer ownership, the court agreed. She paused. The 2-hour window is actually more time than the order required. We thought it was reasonable given the weather. From the hallway, Priya made a sound. Not quite words, not quite not words. Barry Ellsworth looked past Nolan. Miss Anand, the trespass notice applies to you as well. You are listed as a non-resident guest who was admitted without the property owner's knowledge or consent. You are required to leave with Mr. Whitaker. You may take what you brought with you, any items purchased with funds from the joint marital accounts, and we have a detailed asset list. If you'd like to consult it, cannot leave the property. I didn't bring anything, Priya said. Her voice was flat. I've been wearing her clothes. Nobody said anything for a moment. We'll provide a coat from the vehicle, Barry Ellsworth said pleasantly. It's going to be cold. Nolan took the document folder off the bench. He opened it with hands that were not entirely steady. He looked at the injunction, at Hazel's name, at his name, at the property address, at the judge's signature, at the timestamp of 2:12 a.m. He looked at the trespass notice. He looked at the claim for dissipation. He looked at Hazel's full legal name, printed in Times New Roman across the top of every document. Hazel Adaisy Whitaker, née Okafor Whitmore. He had known, in the abstract way one knows a thing without engaging it, that Hazel's grandmother had been successful. Hazel had mentioned it. Occasionally, in the same understated way she mentioned most things about herself. She was an engineer. She was good at what she did. She left me the farm. He had not inquired further. Men like Nolan. Hazel had understood early in their marriage. Do not inquire into the resources of women they have already categorized. He had categorized her as comfortable, careful, and ultimately dependent. It had never occurred to him to check. He put the documents back in the folder. I need to make a call, he said. You're welcome to do so from outside, Barry Ellsworth said, stepping back and gesturing with one gloved hand toward the lane. We need to begin the property inventory. My colleagues will be conducting a walkthrough. She looked at him steadily. The 2 hours starts now, Mr. Whitaker. Chapter 5, The Lane. By 6 in the morning, the snow had eased to a fine sifting that settled on everything without urgency. Nolan stood at the end of the lane with one bag, a canvas duffel he'd packed in 12 minutes, in the dark, with 2 of Barry Ellsworth's colleagues standing in the bedroom doorway, to ensure he took only what the list permitted. His wallet, his personal devices, his winter jacket, his boots, and 2 days' worth of clothes. The keys to his Audi had been quietly extracted from the entry hall hook by one of the enforcement officers, on the grounds that the vehicle had been purchased with funds from the joint marital account and was therefore subject to the asset freeze pending division. He was standing in the lane of his own, of Hazel's, property, without a car in a blizzard, at 6 in the morning. Priya was standing several meters away from him, wearing a puffy red parka that one of Barry Ellsworth's colleagues had produced from the back of the SUV. She was not looking at him. She had not spoken to him since the hallway. At some point in the preceding hour, she had said, "You told me she had nothing." She had said it the way people say things they already know the answer to, because saying it out loud is the only way to finish believing the lie. He had not answered. The enforcement team moved efficiently inside the house. Through the kitchen window, Nolan could see lights moving, the portable work lamps they had brought, illuminating the rooms in clean white light. Someone was photographing the contents methodically, room by room. He was thinking about the conversation he'd had with his lawyer 6 months ago when he first started planning this. She has no significant independent assets, he had said. His lawyer had taken his word for it, because Nolan had said it with the certainty of a man who had been keeping close track. He had been keeping close track of the accounts he could see, the allowance he gave her, the consulting fees she invoiced to small heritage organizations. He had not thought to look at what was underneath. The lane was empty. The road beyond it was dark, no headlights in either direction. His phone had enough signal to tell him it was 12 below. He opened his contacts and scrolled to his lawyer's name. Then he stopped. Headlights appeared at the top of the lane. The old Land Rover moved down through the snow with that familiar steady hum. The engine Hazel had serviced religiously. The tires she had switched to winter-rated ones every November at the garage in Thornbury, without ever asking him to remind her. It pulled to a stop at the end of the lane, idling. The passenger window came down. Hazel was in the driver's seat. She looked, there was no other word for it, rested. Her hair was damp from what was probably a shower at the office. She was holding a travel mug with both hands and looking at him with an expression that was not anger and was not satisfaction. It was something quieter and more final than either. Nolan crossed the snow toward the car. He was aware of how he looked. He was aware for the first time of how he had always looked to her. The size he had used as a kind of argument, the posture, the voice. He was aware that none of it was doing anything useful. Hazel, he said. She looked at him. I don't understand, he said, and he meant it. He meant, I don't understand what you are. I don't understand how long you've been it. I don't understand how I could have lived with you for 8 years and not known. I thought you were. I know what you thought, she said. Her voice was the same as always, quiet, even without performance. You thought I was the version of me that was convenient for you. The one that didn't ask questions. Hazel, please. He put his hand on the door frame. I have nowhere to go. My accounts are frozen. My car is. They took my keys. Can we just talk? Inside. In the morning. We can figure this out. Priya had come up behind him. She stood a few feet back, the red parka too big for her, her arms wrapped around herself. Hazel, she said. She did not try to make it sound like anything other than what it was. I didn't know everything, I thought. He told me things. I'm 26. I don't have anyone to call. Please. Hazel looked at Priya for a moment. Then she looked back at Nolan. You told me to go outside and cool off, she said. That the cold would remind me what I had because of you. She took a slow sip from her travel mug. You were right that the cold is clarifying. Nolan opened his mouth. There's a Tim Hortons in Clearwater, Hazel said. About 4 kilometers down County Road 7. They open at 6:30. She looked at the sky, where the faintest gray light was beginning to separate itself from the dark. You have about 20 minutes. She pressed the button on the console. The window came up. The Land Rover's transmission engaged with a quiet, familiar click, and Hazel pulled out of the lane onto County Road 7. Her taillights, 2 steady red points diminishing into the gray morning. Nolan stood in the snow. Behind him, the farmhouse glowed. All the lights on now, warm and working. The enforcement team moving methodically through rooms that had always been hers. The old birch trees along the lane held their snow. The barn that Hazel had rebuilt board by board stood solid in the early light. The heritage timbers she had sourced and cataloged and carried there herself, 1 truckload at a time, without ever once asking for recognition. The farm had always known who it belonged to. He had simply been the last to understand it. Priya pulled the oversized parka tighter and turned away from him and started walking down the lane toward County Road 7. After a moment, Nolan picked up his bag and followed. The snow fell lightly over the escarpment, covering everything equally. The lane, the barn roof, the perennial beds. Hazel had planted along the fence line in her first spring there, already waiting, under the frozen ground, to come back. If this story stayed with you, if you recognize the particular power of a woman who builds something true and holds it quietly until the moment it matters, you're exactly where you belong. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The stories worth telling are the ones about women who were never as powerless as anyone assumed.